The diplomatic relationship between Canada and China appears to be on the mend after years of strain and a more recent escalation in trade tensions.
Canada's foreign discussions will deepen. I expect to. I will expect at the appropriate time to be meeting with President Xi Jinping.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister will travel to China in a matter of weeks in a move that could signal an easing of tensions between the two countries locked in a diplomatic standoff.
It began quietly. No announcement, no leak, no speech. Just a discreet message that crossed the Pacific and landed on a polished desk in Ottawa. The note came from Beijing, stamped confidential, carrying what insiders now call the Golden Deal. The offer was as simple as it was explosive. China would eliminate every tariff on Canadian agricultural products, canola, pork, seafood, all of it, if Canada agreed to lift its 100% import ban on Chinese electric vehicles. No gradual talks, no multi-year negotiations. One move, one exchange. Billions in frozen export could flow again within weeks. For struggling farmers in Western Canada, it looked like salvation. For others, it reeked of a trap for years. The farmland stretching from Saskatchewan to Manitoba have felt the suffocating grip of trade restrictions. Canola fields that once shimmered gold under the summer sun now lie half-harvested. Silos sit packed with unsold grain. Production plants that once buzzed with life have gone eerily quiet. When Beijing's retaliatory tariffs hit in early 2025, they didn't just hurt numbers on a spreadsheet. They gutted communities. Farmers watched as markets vanished overnight, their livelihoods caught in a crossfire between superpowers. And then came this message, a single page that could rewrite their future. Beijing's proposal promised to restore access to a market that once bought nearly a quarter of Canada's canola exports. Trains could roll east again, carrying grain to ports. Local credit unions could breathe. Entire rural towns could flicker back to life. The math was undeniable. Lifting China's tariffs could inject billions back into Canada's western provinces. But beneath that promise lurked a deeper question. Was this really a trade deal or a loyalty test? When Donald Trump returned to the White House, Ottawa followed Washington's lead. Canada mirrored the U.S. decision to slap a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. It wasn't a move rooted in economic necessity. Canada's EV industry is modest, but in political alignment. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. was seen as a matter of principle, proof of unity within the North American trade bloc. Yet that loyalty came at a high cost. Beijing responded with crushing duties. 75.8% on raw canola, 100% on canola oil and meal, plus penalties on pork and seafood. Shipments stalled. Storage overflowed. Farmers pleaded for subsidies just to keep the lights on. Now China was offering an out. Mirror our move, and we'll mirror yours. It was, in effect, a challenge. Choose between Washington's approval or Western Canada's revival across the prairies. The response was immediate and emotional. The premiers of Saskatchewan and Manitoba urged Ottawa to take the deal. Let us sell again, they said. Let us breathe. For them, this wasn't about global strategy or ideological consistency. It was about saving livelihoods. But in Ottawa, simplicity rarely survives contact with geopolitics. Inside Parliament Hill, the debate has become fierce and deeply personal. Some lawmakers argue that accepting Beijing's terms is not surrender but pragmatism, a once-in-a-generation chance for Canada to prove it can act in its own national interest without waiting for Washington's permission. Others warn that giving in would signal weakness, inviting future coercion. It's not about canola or cars, one senior official admitted privately. It's about control. The roots of this standoff stretch back a year. When Trump reimposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, 100%, no exceptions, the U.S. justified it as a protection for its domestic auto industry against a wave of cheap, high-tech imports. Ottawa, fearing isolation, matched the move almost instantly, but Washington offered no concessions in return. Instead, the U.S. began pressing Canada on new export restrictions, even threatening penalties on Canadian auto parts if Ottawa failed to comply. For many Canadians, it felt like history repeating itself, a reminder of times when national policies seemed to come pre-written from south of the border. Beijing saw the opportunity. When China's Commerce Ministry announced its retaliatory tariffs, it targeted product that hit hardest in politically sensitive regions: canola from the prairies, pork from Manitoba, seafood from the Atlantic provinces. These weren't industries tied to high-level diplomacy or defense. They were the backbone of rural Canada. Farmers and processors thousands of kilometers from Ottawa suddenly found themselves trapped in a geopolitical duel they never asked to join. Now, Beijing's golden deal is turning that quiet suffering into an ultimatum. Accept, and the sanctions disappear. Refuse, and the blockade remains. To the premiers out west, the decision seems obvious. A reopened Chinese market could mean instant relief for families and businesses that have weathered months of losses. It could restore hope to a region that feels abandoned by both Ottawa and Washington. But for federal policymakers, the calculus runs deeper. Accepting China's terms could fracture the North American alliance that underpins Canada's entire trade and defense strategy. It could strain ties with Washington just as Trump's team pushes for tighter continental integration under USMCA. Rejecting the deal, however, means condemning Canada's agricultural heartland to more hardship and risking political backlash from the West caught between two giants. Canada faces a defining test of independence. Can it chart its own path in a world increasingly divided by economic nationalism and strategic rivalry? Or will it remain bound by alliances that demand loyalty even at domestic cost? For now, the official line from Ottawa is cautious silence. Behind closed doors, ministers debate spreadsheets, polling data, and the fine print of trade law. But out on the prairies, the issue feels far simpler. Every empty silo, every idle processing plant, every family farm on the brink is a reminder that foreign policy isn't abstract. It's personal, that a whisper started it. What comes next may determine whether that whisper becomes the sound of revival or the echo of another lost opportunity. Prime Minister Mark Carney faces a dilemma no leader would envy: protect Ontario's powerful auto industry or rescue the collapsing agricultural backbone of the West. Each path promises pain. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford has already drawn his battle lines, warning that lifting Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles would open the floodgates to a wave of sleek, low-cost imports that could devastate domestic manufacturers. The province's auto sector employs tens of thousands of unionized workers and anchors much of a nation's manufacturing strength. Politically, Ontario is a prize. Lose it, and any government risks losing the country. But on the vast plains of the West, frustration has turned into fury. Saskatchewan's premier has accused Ottawa of blind loyalty to Washington, calling it betrayal of common sense. Trade boards across Manitoba and Alberta echo that anger, arguing the EV tariff serves no real purpose. It shields no Canadian industry while strangling those that still keep the nation's export economy alive. In towns like Brandon, Dauphin, and Leduc, the economic toll is painfully visible. Silos overflow with unsold grain. Processing plants sit idle. Credit unions have tightened lending. Young farmers whisper about leaving for the cities. The proud agricultural backbone that once defined Canada's identity is bending under the weight of political choices made far away, and through it all, Beijing waits, patient, strategic, and deliberate. To Chinese policymakers, Canadian canola isn't just a crop, it's leverage. It represents a clean, protein-rich alternative to U.S. soybeans and a key component in China's push to secure reliable, non-American food sources. Analysts have begun referring to the potential deal between Ottawa and Beijing as a green trade pact, a symbolic exchange of green energy for green agriculture, electric vehicles for renewable crops. On paper, the idea looks elegant. In practice, it's combustible. Because what China is really offering Canada is more than a trade reopening, it's a test of allegiance. The choice is stark: dependence or independence, old alliances or new realities. And time is slipping away. Each month that tariffs remain in place, the economic bleeding worsens. Saskatchewan's exports to China have plunged by an astonishing 76%, falling below $100 million by late summer. Manitoba's pork producers are reporting losses exceeding $19 million annually, forced to chase secondary markets that pay less and demand more. For the first time in decades, China, once Canada's largest agricultural customer, has closed its doors completely. In Ottawa, every statistic now doubles as political landmine. Each farmer's protest outside Parliament Hill is a reminder that the western provinces are running out of patience. What began as a trade dispute has evolved into a test of national cohesion. How much is Canada willing to sacrifice to stay aligned with the United States? And how long can that loyalty hold before it fractures under regional desperation? Across the border, the same drama unfolds in reverse. While Canada's prairies long for the return of export trains, America's farmlands have gone quiet. For years, China was the single biggest buyer of U.S. soybeans, nearly half of all American exports, worth more than $12 billion in 2024. But by mid-2025, that trade vanished completely. Not a single Chinese order arrived in the new export season. Ports in Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska, once bustling with shipments, now stand eerily still, their cranes idle, their warehouses half-lit. Crops rot in silos, waiting for buyers who never come. Brazil has stepped in to seize a moment, capturing nearly 3/4 of China's soybean market and effectively locking out American producers. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that the fallout is costing U.S. farmers more than $9 billion a year. The rural heartland, once a political stronghold for Trump's America First trade agenda, is feeling betrayed. Bankruptcies are rising. Small towns are shrinking. Farmers are watching the very trade war meant to protect them erode their livelihoods. And in that vacuum, Canada stands at a crossroads. China's pivot away from U.S. agriculture has created a rare opening, a fleeting chance for Canadian farmers to reclaim their position as reliable suppliers in a volatile global market. Beijing's renewed interest in canola isn't just about oil or feed. It's about diversification, about insulating itself from American dependence. In a world where trust, consistency, and predictability matter more than price, Canada's reputation as a stable, rules-based partner could become its most valuable export. But capitalizing on that opportunity means doing something Washington won't like. Inside the Prime Minister's office, the tension is palpable, a silent tug-of-war between East and West. On one end stand the Western premiers, arguing that the EV tariff is a self-inflicted wound destroying livelihoods and weakening the national economy. On the other are Ontario's industrialists, union leaders, and lobbyists warning that removing it would invite disaster, an onslaught of Chinese electric cars that could outmatch North American vehicles in cost, efficiency, and technology.at. The center of it all stands Mark Carney, weighing both futures. He knows that whatever he decides could define his political legacy and Canada's global posture. For decades to come, Doug Ford has already drawn his red line. The Ontario Premier has branded any move to lift the tariff as economic suicide, insisting that automakers like BYD and Geely are poised to